We all know the story about how the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. A giant asteroid the size of Mount Everest smacked into Earth approximately 66 million years ago, with enough force to bake the atmosphere like a cake and cause apocalyptic conditions worldwide, which in turn swiftly eradicated roughly 75% of all species. And while it's not the worst extinction event to have ever occurred, it is widely considered to be the most sudden and violent, with the majority of dinosaurs likely having been okay one day and dead the next. However, not so long ago, as in just a couple of years, a new find was made which suggested that this doomsday event may have been somehow more violent and scarier than we originally thought, as there's a chance that the asteroid was not alone. To be exact, in 2022, researchers noticed an odd massive structure, now dubbed nadir, along the Atlantic Ocean floor while reviewing some seismic reflection data. What was so strange about it was that it had all the characteristics of an impact crater, and was abnormally large, being about 9.2 kilometers or 5.7 miles in diameter, so about 11 times greater than the height of the tallest building in the world, despite it being located more than 900 meters or 3,000 feet underwater. And because the Chicxulub crater is on the coast of Mexico, you might assume that this new structure was found somewhere nearby. And that's not a bad guess, but instead, it was actually located on the complete opposite side of the ocean, in Africa, off the coast of Guinea to be exact. And naturally, finding a random crater doesn't necessarily hold that much importance. But when they tested the site, they found that it dated to almost the exact same time as the dinosaur ender. So in other words, roughly 66 million years ago, and raising the possibility that this new asteroid had double-tapped the rulers of Earth, so to speak. And obviously, considering the proximity of the two events, there was speculation on if it was separate from the Chicxulub asteroid, or if it had actually broken off from it during it entering the atmosphere. And to add to this debate, last year a study confirmed that beyond reasonable doubt that this crater was definitely caused by an asteroid. But what wasn't cleared up was if it happened on the same day, slightly before, or slightly afterwards. And this is kind of an important distinction, as we aren't talking about some insignificant event, but rather a collision powerful enough to have had a noticeable impact on the dinosaur's demise. Now yes, it was considerably smaller than the Chicxulub asteroid, which generated a crater roughly 200 kilometers or 120 miles in diameter, so about 21 times bigger. However, an impact of nadir's scale is still very rare, only occurring once every 50,000 to 100,000 years. And the researchers estimate that the asteroid must have been nearly 500 meters or 1,640 feet across, making it multiple times larger than the YR4 asteroid, over 5 times longer than a football field, and 10 times bigger than the asteroid responsible for the Tunguska event, which for now is the largest impact event on Earth in recorded history, and hopefully stays that way. And the asteroid responsible for nadir wasn't just unusually large, but also exceptionally fast, having struck the coast at about 45,000 miles or 72,000 kilometers an hour, which is about 11 times faster than the fastest tank shell ever fired. And keep in mind that this asteroid was about 4 billion times heavier. So all this together resulted in one seriously catastrophic collision. But the question is, just how bad was it for the dinosaurs? Well, assuming that this asteroid landed before the main one, then any dinosaur, or marine reptile for that matter, which saw it coming, wouldn't know anything was wrong until it entered the atmosphere and quickly grew to be about 24 times brighter than the sun. And its sheer size and speed likely caused a partial airburst that would have led to local disruption, while the intense luminosity may have burnt any animals too close. And then, with its speed, it didn't take long for nadir to completely cut across the sky and slam into Earth, instantly releasing the energy equivalent to 5,000 megatons of TNT, i.e., more energy than Earth's total current nuclear arsenal, by some accounts. In the blink of an eye, a massive fireball larger than Central Park would have formed at the crash site, causing the surrounding areas to heat up and water to boil around it, while any exposed dinosaur close enough to the coast would suddenly find themselves on fire. And based off of late Cretaceous African formations, these dinosaurs possibly could have included hadrosaurs, titanosaurs, and abelisaurids, for which burns were sadly the least of their concerns. Because as the giant fireball extended, superheated winds faster than hurricanes traveled outwards as well, that would have uprooted forests and blasted animals at far greater distance than the heat did, perhaps traveling for hundreds of miles or kilometers. I mean, just as a comparison, even an asteroid 8 times smaller is still estimated to be enough to destroy the entirety of New York City. And while a few of the asteroid's impact effects were mitigated by its water landing, others were exacerbated by it, namely the massive tsunami that followed. Right around the impact site, the wave might have been 3 times taller than the Eiffel Tower and swallowed large swathes of land. while smaller yet still massive waves traveled much further and causing major damage along the Atlantic, and probably also scarring the coasts of what is today North and South America. Plus, despite the padding effect which the water offered, the Nadir asteroid still struck hard enough to cause cracks along the seafloor and generate a magnitude 7 earthquake on the Richter scale. So in other words, all these effects combined would have caused major damage on both a local and perhaps even continental level, that would have not only been quick, but catastrophic. However, what's much harder to say is if it had a severe global impact. Because for example, while the ejecta kicked up wasn't enough to superheat the atmosphere, like the Chicxulub asteroid did, it still vaporized a lot of the seafloor, and did so in possibly the worst place it could have, as it struck an area where a large black shale deposit laid, which is rich in carbon and sulfur, so not great things to release into the atmosphere, and it may have been enough to have had a palpable effect on the world's climate. And while it's not a one-for-one simulation, an independent research group did just release a study which found that if Bennu, an asteroid of similar proportions, hit the planet, it would be enough to cause the Earth a whole world of hurt, pun intended, dropping global temperatures for 3 to 4 years, and reducing precipitation by 15%, and depleting the ozone by up to 32%, with these numbers varying depending on how far you were from the epicenter. Naturally, this is just one simulation, and of a different asteroid, so those effects are definitely not set in stone, but it does highlight how the Nadir asteroid was deceptively bad for its size. And ironically enough, it could have been even worse than the Chicxulub asteroid, at least in one sense. The reason being that when you kick up a lot of material, the dust will actually linger in the atmosphere for a shorter amount of time, which might seem counterintuitive, but happens because more dust means it's easier for them to bump into each other and form large enough particles that then fall down to the ground. Meanwhile, when you release less dust, the effects are not as severe, but take longer for this clumping to occur, and therefore the dust remains in the atmosphere for longer. And that might have happened during the Nadir impact, and thus leading to prolonged climatic changes, relatively speaking. So really, this all points to the conclusion that Nadir was bad enough to change the world. However, how it truly impacted the dinosaurs remains unresolved, and will likely stay that way until we can find more about the timing. Although, assuming that it hit before the Chicxulub asteroid, it would have likely disrupted many communities, and possibly made ecosystems on a global scale more vulnerable to the big one. And then if we imagine that both had impacted at basically the same time, all the nasty effects that occurred with the main one would have likely just been intensified, leading to an even faster extinction rate. Though I should mention that scientists maintain that the Chicxulub impact was still more than enough alone to have done the dinosaurs in. With it having packed more energy than 10 billion Hiroshimas combined. And it was simply a matter of time, not if, they were going to go extinct. Although, it does make one wonder, if it hadn't hit, would even just one additional species of anything have made it to the other side? It also makes one wonder how an impact like that would have affected humanity. And the answer isn't a great one. For starters, the fireball alone would probably kill tens of thousands right by the coast in an instant, while the other effects would put over 200 million people in harm's way, as the Atlantic Ocean's coastline is home to many large cities. This would obviously disrupt countries, and the economic toll would have global consequences, to say the least. And then, going off of the Bennu simulation, we could anticipate that at least some level of food shortages and changes in weather would occur. That would in itself create massive problems for humanity. And really, with all this in mind, it just makes you remember how fragile humanity really is, and just how unfortunate it would have been to be a dinosaur on that fateful day. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Extinct Zoo.